Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 981 Cyborgs. Deftly, Mike avoided the grab of a mechanical claw, as a weird creature fell from the ceiling above. His silver sword was clad in bright flames that brightly illuminated the new opponent. The being in front of him was roughly humanoid, very roughly. It had a slim, languid torso covered in overlapping sheets of metal, two strong digitigrade legs, articulate, mechanical arms, and a long, slender neck. Staring at Mike was a massive, red eye in the middle of a bulbous head at the end of the neck. Its pupil shrunk in the face of the sudden light. Judgment adjusted. Commence harvest, it sounded from the creature as it ducked down and tried to attack Mike's legs. The beastman made no move to evade. The mechanical fist made of 6 fingers crashed into his shin guard, only to be easily deflected, leaving the creature wide open. The flaming sword swung down at its neck. With incredible speed, it brought up its other arm to grab onto the blade, only for the hand, arm, and neck to be severed in the same smooth swing. The cross-section was glowing with molten metal. At the same time the smell of burning flesh crawled into Mike's nose. Fountains of black, oil-like blood pumped out from the cut neck, and he heard the hissing of the cut metal parts being rapidly cooled down by it. Emitting a terrible stench, the thing collapsed on the ground. Mike was unable to appraise it, so it didn't count as a monster, just like the soulless golems of Seth. Judging by its speed and durability when the sword cut it, he was able to estimate its strength to be around level 70 of a humanoid monster. By no means enough to face Mike, but the people in this place might have had a hard time facing it, especially when they had no good equipment or good combat-oriented class. After waiting a moment to see if there was another one, he put the body and head in this inventory and kept looking for a usable vehicle. And he actually found one. Opposite the blast door was a haphazardly parked ATV truck, with the trailer and the keys still stuck. Maybe someone had used this to lure the creature in here and locked it inside? Seeing the car was not pure electric but had a converter for mana inside was a sign that the car was quite new. This was originally technology from Y-City. The car couldn't be here for longer than half a year. Someone had come here not too long before him, or the technology of Y-City had found its way here much earlier than they expected. Of course, Mike didn't just have a bunch of magic crystals with him, even when Minasmar was able to produce them. What he had, however, was a stack of magic crystal grenades Evie and Allison had invented for their raids in Y-City. They were not hard to disassemble, so Mike wouldn't need to worry about fuel. What he needed to get out of the way was the blast door, which would not budge without a power supply. Since he had already destroyed the thing that was locked in here, he saw no reason not to break through. With Mike's skills and the white hilt, the blast door was no obstacle. He used basic swordsmanship to cut apart the ordinary steel door in several slashes. With the parts crashing to the ground, his way out was opened. Before he went back to the car, his eyes fell on the door to the mine. He was worried whether there were still survivors. If he left like this, he would have to leave the door and the barrier open. The barrier may not have been able to stop a strong beast or Mike, but it was probably able to fend off against these robot things. Pondering, he stepped to the blast door and knocked. Of course, a simple knock would be impossible to hear from someone inside, so he knocked hard enough to smack a dent into the outside of the door. He banged a rhythmic tune, hoping that if someone were inside, they would realize he was not a monster. He did it for approximately 5 minutes when the door suddenly moved. It didn't move much, just enough for a tiny slit to be visible. A waft of warm air escaped from inside. "Who are you? Are you human?" a shaking voice asked from inside. The man inside didn't seem like he was in the right state of mind, grasping for straws. "My name is Mike. I'm the leader of Field Team 1 and a Lord of Minasmar," Mike announced his rank in this world. Minasmar?" the man inside asked hopefully. Minasmar was a name only few in this world didn't know. Mike wasn't one to brag, but their reputation was quite good, no matter in which field they came up. "Johnson! What are you doing? I told you not to open that door under any circumstances." Another, labored, voice came from the inside, and the beastman was able to hear irregular steps approaching the door. "You know what those things and bastards are capable of. But he said he's Lord Mike, from Minas March. Maybe he can help us." Johnson squeaked, surprised. This is the first time one of them tried to pose as a person from Minas March. "Fine. Go and close the lower gate behind you, I will see if he really is what he pretends to be," the other voice finally said. The sound of hasty steps followed, as well as another heavy door closing. Then the outer gate opened until there was an about 10 centimeters wide gap. I'm not as easy to fool as Johnson. If you really are who you say you are, step closer to the gate and let me check you. What appeared at the gap was a middle-aged man, with graying hair and a wild mustache. In his hands, he held some kind of device. From his words Mike concluded that it was a machine to appraise others. However, Mike didn't step forward. Since he had a vehicle, he didn't need to barter for food. I just wanted to inform you, that I will be taking the ATV in the hangar. I killed that weird thing inside, but if you don't want more of them entering, you should close the barrier after I left. Wait. You are just going to leave? The old man suddenly asked, shocked. He had expected that Mike wouldn't cooperate, but he did not expect that he was just going to say whatever he wanted and leave. That's my car. You can't just run off with it. Where do you even plan to go from here? There are only monsters and cyborgs for hundreds of kilometers, he exclaimed. Cyborgs? Mike asked, confused by the word, as it was not translated for him. It was a concept he was unfamiliar with. Those bastards are the reason we have to be so careful. One moment they look like normal people, the next moment they turn into these weird machines attacking and kidnapping people. I just wanted to scan you, to make sure you weren't one of them. Although the older man was rough, grumpy, and pessimistic, it was quite clear that he also wasn't ready to let go of this last straw of hope. As he said, Mike was probably the only normal person for hundreds of kilometers, and if he said the truth he was someone from Myanmar and strong enough to kill cyborgs. Fine, scan me. I also want to hear more about the things that are going on here. Mike was confident in the armor Seth gave him. Although he lost his helmet of Cryas and currently had no legendary items, he doubted there were any items around that could hurt him through this armor. The small device shot out a green laser grid that wandered across his body the moment Mike was close enough. It really wasn't anything invasive or harmful. All right, you are clean, the middle-aged man said with a sigh of relief. Come in quickly, let's talk, he said, and opened the doors just wide enough for Mike to squeeze in and quickly closed them behind him. By the way, what would it mean if I was not clean? Mike asked, curious. It's a long story, but the short version is that this device can scan for the cyberworms that infect and turn people. The what? Chapter 982. After a month. Myanmar, Delta. With a sigh of relief, Mary put together a stack of papers and laid it to the side. Some of her most pressing worries had been resolved over the past month. The construction for the Pythian Games was finally finished. Although there had been some problems with Cade and some of the people of Gamma, they blew over without greater implications after Gamma Resistance's Garewell offered to act as a mediator. After a month, the food prices had stabilized across the 3 stations. The solution was easier than expected, as many people changed their classes with the rise of food prices. It had taken some encouragement from the local governments, but agricultural classes had a chance to shine and show their worth. With a mix of skills, magic, and hydroponics, the 3 stations managed to mostly cover their own consumption, making them almost self-sufficient in food matters. The new connection with the Moor Empire also helped. Although the project of a subway between the stations stagnated, Karina finally fulfilling their promise of a tree in THRES had tremendously strengthened their relationship in the eyes of the public. Quite a few merchant caravans had added THRES to their destinations, increasing the exchange of goods. With the influx of golems, Arjit Noor also seemed to have stabilized their situation. After an official apology, they not only started paying for the initial order but made even more orders. It seemed that they decided to invest heavily in the golems since they had not been able to recover the force that was lost on an expedition. According to Seth, most of these golems actually stayed in Earth. There were quite a few reasons that could have been the case, but the most likely one was that they intended to use the golems as the main force in case Spacia attacked, giving them a chance to recover their dwindled number of undead. The only unsettling detail was that they were still unable to catch the culprit behind the undead rebellion. At this point, if they added 1-to-1, it seemed clear that the terrorist attack on Delta and the upheaval in Arjit Noor were meant to destabilize Delta, Myanmar, and the undead empire. There was someone in the dark, trying to weaken them all, and the chances that was Spacia were high. However, after these 2 incidents, it had been silent for the past 2 months. There were no greater incidents around the connected world, giving them ample time for their own moves. While Seth had been working on raising the capabilities of the crafting teams, Lena, Mary, and Love had tried to recover the influence Myanmar had lost when Alzalsar left. Alzalsar was a powerful sorceress and she had been able to get quite the influence in Delta, rivaling the dark machinations of the scene at the time, using her special set of skills and spells. She had used it to enable Project Ego, but this power was lost with her departure. The scene had grasped that chance back then with the backing of Spacia, and the consequences were terrible. Now that the scene was gone and Ichabod had stepped back, it left a power vacuum, with an emergency government trying to lead Delta until the next elections. Like Seth, the people of Minas Mar, like Mary and Jane, were never interested in power or influence, but in the current situation, they decided to move. Not to gain influence, but to prevent any more tragedies. Krna had proven that their inner ranks were not as benevolent and reliable as they used to be, foreign powers could not be trusted in general, and Spacia had not only tried it before, but they were the most likely suspect to have created the current situation in the first place. To prevent further harm, to themselves and others, the administrative members decided that if there was free power lying around, it was best kept in the hands of Minas March. If they grasped all the political power, nobody would be able to use it against them. Even Seth, famously uninterested in political games, had agreed that this was the best choice and left it to May, Lena, and Love to raise their influence in Delta. As one would expect, with new goals came new worries. They had been working on collecting supporters in the emergency government when it was announced that the representative of Krna would change again soon. What was worrisome about this, was that Lena had absolutely no info beforehand and no idea who it was. She had actually lost connection with her brother Hardwig in Krna, cutting off all the insider knowledge they had beforehand. She was also unable to reach any of her other allies like Idil and Mo, making them blind to the things that were going on behind the scenes of the Empire. One might not think there was a big difference in who represented Krna, but the previous example showed that it was very important. With Lena in the lead, Delta was able to thrive. The guy that came after her was a piece of shit that was easily bribed by Spacia and the scene if there was not even more behind his actions. Under him, Delta had seen a period of misery, as they tried to implement more and more of Spacia's ideologies. The current guy was kind of okay, not as capable as Lena, but not as rotten as the last guy. Delta was able to kind of recover, but the previously done damage couldn't be mended. The most extreme example of this were the terrorist attacks. The princess losing contact with their allies in Krna was no good sign for the future. The next guy might be the worst one yet. With the relationship between Delta and Krna souring over the past 2 months, who knew what they would try? A hardliner might try to wrestle control of Delta from the emergency government. Since Krna was in charge of Delta's border protection, there were more than enough soldiers to do so already present. Delta's biggest ally had turned into a potential oppressor. At that point, the people of Delta would be stuck between a rock and a hard place, since the Demon District had also become more and more dangerous over the past month. It came at the worst possible time as the deadline Master Mountain had predicted also drew near. The chance that cultivators would start appearing in the districts once again was rising, and it was unlikely that it would stay peaceful. Despite the brewing disasters, she was quite happy she managed to finish some of the pending problems and projects. It was good to know that not everything was in a constant downward trend. Seth was also quite happy. With Tord managing the blacksmiths, he was able to fully concentrate on cranking out items. In this month he managed to raise his sewing to craftsman level 1 with the help of Nadal's tutelage. His skills were not all that had grown. Just recently Seth was also able to raise his level of existence by 1. Gaining roughly 205 points per day, Seth had been able to accumulate just enough to raise his level. Currently, he had 50/15,000, just 14,000, and 50 more and he could rise to level 4. Seth tried to stay positive in the face of these abysmal numbers. He looked forward to the tournament, which would not only promote Python but also his skills. Hopefully, this would speed up his growth. With Lena's message that the initial preparations for the tournament were finished, he decided to finally start on his new project tomorrow, so it was finished in time for the announced start date of the tournament. Since he reached craftsman tier in sewing, he was just good enough for what he was planning. Although his goal was the master tier, he had reached the bare minimum to go through with it. Over the past weeks, the project had taken even better shape in his head as his experience with the work grew. He had already made sure Nico was ready for the work. Chapter 983 Fire takes shape. Nico, are you ready? Seth asked as he walked into his workshop, where the tailor was already waiting for him. Do I really have to wear this? The tailor asked unwillingly. He was clad in a fiery red armor set, visibly uncomfortable wearing the plate armor. This was one of the relic-rated sets from Bulko, the fire resistance set. The reason why he forced Nico, who vehemently denied wearing armor, to wear armor today was for his own good. They were going to make another batch of flame thread, but this time Seth intended to go serious. Afraid he might evaporate the tailor, he made him wear the fire defense. Yes, it's necessary. We don't want you to go puff, after all. Seth didn't want to risk losing the only guy able to make the fabric he needed for the new upgrade. At first, the blacksmith had been intrigued by the thought of remaking the golden fleece with the new thread, but he changed his mind after some deliberation. The golden fleece concept was a unique item and one of the few that had experienced a synergy with his trait. There was no guarantee that this synergy would happen again. Since the golden fleece didn't really fall behind legendary items, he decided to do something else instead. Are you ready? Seth asked as an almost golden flame appeared in his hand. A heat wave washed over Nico's face and the temperature in the room immediately rose by several degrees. Despite wearing the fire-resistant armor, he started sweating right away. Concentrating on the ball in his hands, Seth kept pouring his mental power into the salamander fire. Although the salamander fire was not the strongest flame in his repertoire, it had other qualities he was looking for. It had been a long time since Seth went all out on wielding his fire manipulation. The last time was probably during their raid on the Abyss. As one of his strongest powers, he usually kept it secret so he could use it if he was in trouble. However, his other means had become so strong, that he seldom got the chance to flaunt one of his favorite skills. Nonetheless, he didn't want to neglect his firepower, and Nico's reveal of his new skills had given him this new idea. Now he was giving it his all to concentrate the flame in his hand and slowly shape it to the shape of a thread. Meanwhile, the waves of heat radiating around the blacksmith and the tailor grew so hot, that the tiled floor and stone ceiling started glowing red hot. Ooze actually felt the floor under his feet soften, making it clear to him why Seth had forced him to wear the armor set. Even with the armor on, Nico felt like he was sitting in an oven, being baked. Despite the salamander flame not being the most destructive by nature, when the blacksmith gave it his all, it grew incredibly powerful. Slowly and carefully, the concentrated thread of fire took shape, glowing like a worm from the center of the sun. The tailor swallowed hard as he activated his skills, attempting to spin the element into a thread for a tailor to use. Before, Nico had doubted he would need to use the equipment Seth had given him to create the death thread. After all, this was just fire. He had been sure that he had enough experience with fire to deal with it, even if it was a little stronger. He thought wrong. He felt this task might have been even harder. Unlike the death thread, which was a calm, cold, and terrifying power, the fire was full of life and rebellion. The presence of death of dangerous, but the element itself was stagnant and more or less tame. With fire on the other hand, even with Seth keeping it in shape, the tailor felt the resistance to be fixed into a permanent shape, with this much stronger than with regular flame. It was terrifying, as the irrational fear of the fire breaking out and swallowing him whole at any moment kept gripping at his mind, as he tried to concentrate on his work. Seth on the other hand didn't have the time to be indulgent to Boo's hardships, as he was inadvertently working and making and keeping them as bad as they were. The blacksmith was fully focused on nurturing the salamander flame. The tailor's only hope was that Seth only needed enough thread for a simple piece of clothing, so he wouldn't have to endure as long. Although Seth had not specified to him what he was planning to make, it was a lot less than he needed for the garment of death. That was right, Seth intended to make a substitute for the clothing he wore below the armor. The shirt and pants set made of sky silk was fine and dandy, but he had a different idea. One that would be much to the tailor's liking, a fire suit to wear below the armor. Kin of Fire, the trait Seth gained when his fire affection reached the max level, was already at the peak of improvement when it came to the cost and cost efficiency of fire-related skills. Only a legendary item like the Trignus glove was able to further improve it. Regular items had barely any effect, despite their description saying something different. So why was he creating another fire-based item? The aim was a different one. In the fight with the scene, something he noticed he lacked was stamina. Fatigue was something that hit any living being, but he had a skill that could help him with that. Fire Absorption X allowed him to absorb flames to regenerate health, some mana, and even some stamina. The effect on stamina was negligible for normal fire, but at least perceptible when it was the salamander flames. If he gave the fire shirt and pants golem ego and they could independently keep creating salamander flames with the mana of a great demon, he would actually be able to replenish his stamina even in the middle of a fight, without the need of a potion or food. As the two craftsmen endured the strain and poured their all into the work, time went by and the heap of thread on the ground slowly grew. At some point, Sivri offered to wind up the string, so it wouldn't get tangled, and the two-men project turned into a 2.5 people project where one created the string, one spun it and the last one created balls of yarn from it. I think this is enough. Nico gasped, at the border of his abilities. His face was red, like a sunburn, and he was drenched in sweat. Seth wasn't much better off, as he felt the fatigue slowly taking hold of him, weakening his concentration. On the other hand, Sivri the golem was good to go, happily furling the string into balls. She had a stack of yarn balls beside her about the height of her knees. Seeing this, Seth nodded. That was probably enough for the fire suit he wanted to make. All right, let's end it here, he agreed, taking a deep breath. Looking at the clock, Seth saw with surprise that they had been going non-stop for 8 hours. His mental power was almost gone, with barely 10% remaining. In times like this, he really appreciated the soul armament of Tisiphone's ring, which not only increased his mental power by 35% but also his willpower by 150. Without it, he might have looked worse than Nico currently did. The tailor had outright collapsed on the floor, the moment the tension was gone. He was lying on the floor, desperately gasping for air. Finally having the chance to put his attention on something else, Seth checked out the thread Sivri had diligently rolled up. Raging Salamander Yarn. Relic. A yarn spun from the raging flames of the elemental salamander. Created by Master Booz using peculiar skills and in cooperation with Master Smith. If magic power is poured into the thread, it will fuel the dormant flames inside. Since he was a craftsman of sewing, he was now able to use Eyes of the Maestro to check every tailor material up to legendary. He was quite happy with the thread. Next, he made a call. Seth, are you done? The wizened voice of Nadal came from the communication orb. Yes. Are you already asleep? The blacksmith asked, a little embarrassed, realizing how late in the evening it had gotten. What are you saying? I have been eagerly waiting for your call. Bring the yarn over, I will weave it for you, the old tailor urged. That's right. Since Nico was probably out cold for the next couple of days, it was Nadal's turn to show his skills. Although the old tailor had not reached the master tier yet, he managed to raise his skill twice in the past 2 months. Thanks to the ample supply of high-rated material, Nadal had reached craftsman level 8 and his weaving skill was possibly better than Nico's since he had much more experience. With Nadal taking the baton, it was possible that Seth would get the finished fabric as early as tomorrow. He was already looking forward to it. Chapter 984. Why aren't we using these? Why aren't we using these instead of the alpaca? Evan asked at the sight of the crowd of golem knights, seated on golem horses. The underground vault Seth and the Chosen of Hermes entered was filled with a full-blown golem cavalry. While Seth was on tenterhooks waiting for the fabric to be finished, he decided to inspect how things were going in other places. His first destination was to have a look at the new batch of golems. He had left the operation of the golem forge and material supply to Cerberus for this, however, the golem cavalry was a direct request from Arjit Noer. The sight was even surprising to Seth. The common steel they were made of could not diminish the overwhelming presence of these massive mounts. The blacksmith didn't doubt that the horses alone could steamroll anything around their size and below leave 60. They are terrible mounts if you don't have an ass made of steel, the blacksmith answered Evan's question, remembering the pain from riding the golem griffins for too long. Coming down, he met Evan on the way and he had kinda come along as they spoke about the next generation of dungeon worms and titanoboas. The juveniles he had caught back then had become adults and already laid their second clutch of eggs. The promise of a snake cavalry was not as far off as it once seemed. The golems don't mind, but if you were to ride one of these, it would shatter your hips, Seth warned the man. The only ones able to ride these, apart from the golem knights, were probably the undead with their bony butts, since a high-ranking undead's body was comparable to steel. His gaze returned to the horses appreciatively. They were the best deal so far. Arjit Noer paid the same price for them, as they did for a golem knight, but their production cost was much lower. Simple steel was easy and cheap to get in Delta. While held the standard of using at least magic steel for the knights, he totally cheaped out on the horses. The next step was to sell them horse armor if they thought the horses were too squishy. Evan followed him, as Seth walked through the rows of golems, appraising and checking on them for any kinds of defects. The tamer could not help but feel drawn to these creatures made of steel. The metal muscles shining in the light of the hall, their martial chromium heads that looked much more sinister than any horse, with their eyes and nostrils glowing with red fire. Why are their eyes and nostrils glowing red? Evan suddenly felt confused about this. Oh, it's a fire enchantment I came up with together with Tord and Sivri. Although they are only made from common steel, I thought we should give them something for their money. It doesn't just look cool, but it allows these things to breathe fire, the blacksmith explained happily. Anyway, I have something else to do now. You can stay, but remember, don't ride these horses. Seth cautioned him again before he ported away. The next place he appeared in was the enchantment laboratory. He wanted to see how far Grant May had gotten. Over the past weeks, Seth had sent all the things he made to the enchanter's lab. Since the undead were finally paying, he had also diverted some of Arjit Noer's money from Allison's alchemy preparation to the enchantment costs. The minor goal was to use these items to get a foot into the market and slowly spread his name in foreign planes, using the auction house. His dream was to put up legendary items for auction to raise his power of existence at some point. But for now, epic and relic-rated items would have to do. Tower Master. I mean, Seth, what brings you here? Grant asked him as he looked up from the magic circle in surprise. At the center of the circle was one of the shirts tailored from celestial bronze. The pieces he made of ancient bronze were given to the other enchanters since they were slightly below May's level. Does that mean you finished the bows already? Seth concluded at the sight. Since the enchanter already started on his first tries of tailoring, this had to mean, he was finished with the results of his carpentry practice. Yes, they are over there in the storage room, the enchanter answered readily and pointed at the door to his left, which led to an adjacent storage room. The room in question was full of elongated weapon crates. Looking inside, Seth found that each crate held 25 neatly stacked bows. There were 3 crates of relic-rated bows and 10 with epic ones, adding up to a total of 325 high-rated bows, enchanted with simple elemental enchantments. The careful observer might have thought that the enchantments did not quite fit the quality of the base weapon. His was not a miscalculation, but a side effect of what these weapons were: practice. Seth practiced his carpentry and gave Grant the chance to practice his elemental enchantments. Also, even when the enchantments were the cost-effective kind on the lower price spectrum, looking down on them was simply underestimating the cost of a comparable enchantment. The blacksmith had spent quite a lot of time on the auction house interface since he got his portable VIP access. With his experience, he was sure these bows would sell like hotcakes. Something like an overabundance of epic items didn't exist. Relics especially, if a fixed price was set, no matter how high, they would be gone in minutes. Good work, Grant. I will make sure you get the funds for the next steps of enchantments, Seth assured him after putting the crates in his inventory. The enchanter was also growing, as he was able to enchant high-rated items non-stop. One would think the blacksmith had already gotten used to walking around with a whole arsenal of epic and above-rated items, but Seth still became giddy with anticipation, thinking of the over 300 bows in his inventor. In the recent past, most of his items flowed directly into the Oath Guard. He purchased a lot but didn't have the chance to sell a lot in the auction house. Back in his workshop, he first brought out all the crates. Sitting on his throne of weapon crated, rubbing his hands, he opened his private access interface. One by one, he started putting the bows up for auction. 10 for the start. He discreetly changed the auction names to things like Fire Bow, or Ice Bow, and generously set their starting auction price to a low 10 gold for the 9 epics and a benign 25 gold on the single relic. He set the time for the auction to a single day. Although it would have been fun to just throw all of them at once, it would have hurt the market value if people knew there was a great supply. The blacksmith deliberately set the auction time to be short, to seem desperate. Afterward he would slowly increase the number and length of the auction. He guessed that this was the best way to get the most money out of them. Seth, you were here, Tord greeted him, as he entered the workshop. Yeah, I just got the finished bows from Grant and was thinking of the best strategy to sell them. How about you? Seth answered the dwarf. To his surprise, the dwarf seemed to actually enjoy teaching. He had gotten quite busy guiding Mars blacksmiths and goldsmiths. Even the elven blacksmith was eagerly following him. With Seth being busy raising his other skulls, they had not much time to work on projects together. I just finished helping Neil, he's at the cusp of becoming a journeyman. I'm really looking forward to actually meeting an indomitable blacksmith, the dwarf said with a smile. It had been a while now since Neil joined them. Seth was happy for him, that he would finally be able to reap the benefits of choosing the slow path. Since the first time, he had heard quite a lot about this epic-rated blacksmith class. As long as they worked long enough with a material, they would be able to raise the base performance by up to 25%. This was not taking into account that they had a special passive that gave them an instinct for alloys. Legend had it, that it was an indomitable blacksmith who invented adamantium. Alloys were something every blacksmith in Minas Mar could benefit from. Even further, once Neil caught up to Grant and the both of them reached the craftsman tier, they would be a tremendous combination. Maybe they would even be able to create legendary items, as long as they cooperated with each other. It was another small thing to look forward to. But what brings you here? I usually wouldn't be here around this time. Actually, I kind of acquired the habit of talking to your Sivri after work, he admitted a little embarrassed. Oh my! Does that mean I'm interrupting you? I'm so sorry, Seth said with a grind. Before Tord could belatedly explain, the Tower Master had already vanished with a cheeky smile. Of course, he knew that there was no deeper meaning behind Tord's actions, but the blacksmith was glad that there were no other people who could keep the Golden Golem company. Since he couldn't think of anything else to do today, and he was not in the mood for more practice now, he decided to end his day early and go look for Mina and Finn to hang out. Chapter 985 Not the Face. Emerald City. An angry swarm of bats rushed through the streets and decimated groups of goons, while an anthropomorphic wolf was jumping between the tall buildings, firing arrows at a woman who was hot on her heels. The woman in question was wearing exotic clothing and using a weird pair of gloves with sword-like claws to attack her mid-air. Who would have thought that the people of the voracious cloud continent had already reached the unclaimed mountains? Lydia snarled, as he smacked away the woman using the bat. Although she blocked, she couldn't halt the momentum. As Master Mountain said, the strength of the new batch of outsiders was terrifying. It was unexpected that someone in Emerald City actually managed to ally with these people. Not only was this woman able to physically keep up with Lydia's transformed body, but she was even able to resist the death attribute attacks and managed to evade or tank her heavy attacks to a certain extent. The chosen of WebNovel even suspected that the claws she was using were comparable to legendary weapons. After being smacked straight on with the bat, she was punted into a building close by, giving Lydia the chance to switch back to the bow. Despite the rubble and dust, she was able to clearly make out her target, firing a volley of energy arrows. Ugh! Her sensitive ears were able to hear the cultivator girl gasp. Finally, armor breaking had shown its worth and broke the woman's peculiar robes, further improving the effects of armor penetration. However, the woman with skin as tough as iron quickly appeared from the cloud and started attacking again, but this time Lydia's arrows had left deep wounds across her body. Tisk! Why won't you die? She screeched as she unleashed a quick combo attack on the humanoid wolf. That's my line, you crazy bitch! Ignoring the scratches the claws left on her leather armor, Lydia smashed the bat straight into the cultivator's head. It made a deep, metallic sound, like a gong or bell. Finally, the weird woman faltered and fell toward the ground. Not the face, the woman screamed pitifully, as the vengeful archer started her facial correction operation. Lydia didn't give her a chance to recover and played that drum, like a maniac. Her solo was heard in the whole city, like a crazy guard sounding the alarms. On the streets below, Ray's group of refugees were fighting the goons and running towards the edge of the city. In their mid, they protected the non-combatants, but there was one addition. An inconspicuous old man, unable to walk and marred with scars. While Lydia was busy fighting the weird cultivator and the guard of Emerald City, Ray was facing off against one of the 3 guild masters of Emerald City. Neither of them would have expected to fall into such a dire situation when they were just on their way back. But how did it come to this situation? It all began with Lydia making the decision to take the slow way back together with Ray, who could not directly return to Minas Mar with home call and wished to accompany the groups of slaves he freed until they reached Emerald City. It all started 1 week ago when they finally reached this place. Originally, they had just wanted to help the group settle down, before getting on their way. It was their 4th day in the city when things started rapidly escalating. A barely recognizable cripple suddenly approached them on the street. Covered in blood and with a broken leg, he called out to them for help with a raspy, almost inaudible voice. Hubert McCarthy, the dimensional merchant, had become a pitiful sight. He was marred from torture, missing several fingers and unable to walk with his Achilles tendons severed. His leg was broken and he was covered in blood because he literally jumped out of the window the moment he saw them walking by outside. Since they recognized him, they couldn't just send him away. They knew that especially Seth, Mary, and Allison had been looking for him, ever since he vanished. Of course, they took him to their hotel room to talk with him. Hubert revealed everything he knew about Emerald City. The place was by no means a paradise, quite the opposite actually. The city was governed by 2 corporations and 3 guilds who had all been in cahoots with the scene and Spacia from the very beginning, abusing this relationship to fill their pockets. The underworld of Emerald City was thriving, making the leadership rich. McCarthy had ended up as one of their first victims. He had been on a special quest to raise his skill when they caught him during his stay. Since then he had been unable to leave. He also talked about his last attempt and the reason for his current condition. They were still unsure, and by the time they tried to contact Minasmar, they realized that things were already escalating. The connection of the communication orb was jammed. It was only in the following days that they realized the importance of Hubert to the Golden Jackals, one of the 3 guilds of Emerald City. Not only were communications cut off, but the Golden Jackals had the whole city on lockdown with the excuse that they were looking for an escaped criminal. Using the help of the former slaves, they had been looking for a way out of the city without causing any great commotion. In the end, things became annoying no matter what they tried. After their first attempt to smuggle the merchant out, another force, probably one of the guilds, found out where they stayed and attacked them in the hotel to claim Hubert for themselves. The fight in the hotel was not the problem, but things blew up afterward since Hubert's location was now known to all. Unlike in a novel, where the strength of enemies gradually grew until one faced the final boss, the leader of Golden Jackals had directly appeared at the hotel with an army of goons, mere minutes after the fight in the hotel concluded. And he had brought along this cultivator woman. While Lydia was playing this gong and Ray fighting the guild master, the group of former slaves was tasked to protect Hubert from the goons and get him out of the city. A few streets away, close to the hotel they had been staying in, the city was covered in a thick miasma that blocked people from seeing what exactly was going on. It was the scene of Ray's battle. Inside the cloud, he faced off against a knight wearing black armor, the leader of the Golden Jackals. After becoming the Saint of Solfium, Ray had become very accustomed to using the evil energy he absorbed in curses and dark magic. Especially the power to sense evil and evil intent allowed him to fight like he was able to read the opponent's mind. However, Ray's miasma shield shattered and he was thrown back. The Saint desperately turned into a cloud of miasma and dispersed among the surrounding fog to evade the knight's follow-up attack. The fight was by far not as one-sided as Ray had expected. His opponent showed incredibly high resistance to curses and the ability to deal damage. "Haha, I acknowledge that you are strong," the guild master said to the cloud of miasma, having lost his target, "but I am probably the worst opponent you could have met," he said with a sneer. Taking a stance, he shouted, "Dark Jackal's hunt!" The cloud of miasma suddenly started condensing and Ray felt that he was actually forced to rematerialize before the duration of the skill ran out. Ray suddenly appeared right in front of the man, facing his attack. He felt stuck in place and had no chance to evade, as the towering sword slashed him. Hot pain seared through his mind as he felt his flesh and bones being severed. In horror, he lost his composure for a moment and it started gushing out. Tisk. Chapter 986 Saint of Solfium. The ragged robes ripped, revealing a deep gash from his left shoulder, across his torso, down to the left hip. A mortal wound, this was the end for the weird shaman. Aiden, the dark jackal knight, was sure of it. The shaman sank to his knees, however, the deep gash in his body did not bleed. Pale flesh was revealed below the ragged robes, forming a stark contrast to the gaping black wound. As he watched for several seconds, he finally saw a viscous liquid droop out from the gash. Like seething tar, it started flowing from the gash and onto the ground. Aiden stepped back as the ink-black pool grew faster and faster on the ground. Vigilantly, he took some distance and observed what was happening. He had no idea what was going on, but his experience told him that getting involved now would only endanger him. Under his terrified eyes, the pool of tar started taking shape, writhing and coagulating to the center. Right in front of the cut-down shaman it slowly formed into a pillar before taking an almost humanoid shape. It had no arms or legs, but a discernible smooth head. The head was featureless at first, but a crack quickly started forming at the front. "I would have liked to wait a little longer, but it should suffice for the initial severing," the crack spoke in a voice that shattered Aiden's eardrums and rattled his brain, instantly causing severe headaches. The Jackal Knight almost dropped his sword at the first word. "You did quite the number on my poor little saint," Solfium spoke, and just the words of the god forced the guild master to his knees. Terrifying visions appeared before the man's eyes and he felt darkness encroaching his very being. His vision was blurred, but he noticed movement in the back. The rest of the black goop started pulling back into the gash on the man's chest and sewing the wound shut. Teetering as his strength left him, he also saw another figure approaching. Praise the sun, a massive man surrounded by a ball of light and fire crashed into the pool of ink, smashing the humanoid figure. It was a monk, surrounded fiery divine aura. Derogue. Why are you just standing there? Quick, help me up. We have to flee. Aiden called out to the Adventurer King. The Adventurer King and second in command of the Sun Knight Guild had actually come to his rescue, but after descending like a meteor, he simply stood there, striking a heroic pose. SSS, a sun god, I see. That hurt a little, but it doesn't seem like he put a lot of effort into blessing this champion, the goo mumbled and took shape again. Derogue showed no reaction to this. Don't count on this numbskull to save you. His mind is full of vain, greedy, and self-righteous thoughts. In a way it's interesting to see a man so honest with his own desires, the god mumbled, causing veins in Aiden's eyes to pop and his heart to ache. Ray, stand up. I have closed your wound. Although it was a little early, I will say you fulfilled your first task as my saint. You have collected enough power for me to take my own form and leave your body. Now, receive your reward. Solfium, the ugly sun, spoke to Ray in his mind, and the saint could feel the power of the god flow through his body. It was different from the evil powers and miasma he had absorbed up to now. It was warm-like, and words came to his hazy mind. Words he had just heard. Praise the Sunday, and he reached to the sky, bowing to the inky black shape of Solfium before him. The power of the god flushed through his body and collected all the evil power and its residues that were stuck and stored in various parts of Ray's body. It all flowed through his body and up to his forehead, where it separated into 7 spots. The dark power he had collected over the past months crystallized into 7 diamond-shaped black stones that made it look like he was wearing a crown. The time had finally come, the promise Solfium had given him. All the toxins and residues that made him look aged, crippled, and ugly were gone. Although he wouldn't be able to fully return to his old looks, he would no longer cause people to turn away because he stunk or was too ugly. This realization was even stronger than the knowledge around the 7 gems on his forehead. From now on, he would be able to store evil power and miasma in these and no longer need to harm his own body for the power. This was what it meant to be the saint of Solfium and not just a follower. Thank you, Lord, he praised and kowtowed with tears in his eyes. I told you, I would keep my promise, Solfium said, touched, but also a little grumpy since it was obvious that Ray had not fully believed him. Now get up and take care of these fools. If I have to stay here like this any longer, I may have to return to your body. These words had Ray back on his feet in a second. He had finally managed to fulfill his quest and had gotten rid of the voice in his head. Although he had gotten closer to his god, having someone else in your mind was exhausting and a severe breach of privacy. Ray started with the incapacitated Aiden. Since the man was immune to his curses, Ray pulled out something else. Something the Jackal Knight knew just too well. What the shaman pulled from his inventory was one of the slave shackles he had taken from the people he bought in Morintu. This was the product made and distributed by Morintu's lord. It was different from the things used by the theocracy of chains that were able to block the influence of systems since they had no divine aura. Ray had no idea what kind of spells were behind it, but they were a little like a forced contract magic. The guildmaster tried to struggle, but the presence of the god had thoroughly subjugated him and he was too weak to stop Ray from putting the shackles onto his wrists, ankles, and neck. It was the quickest method the Chosen of Solfium was able to think of, to end this situation. When he tried to do the same to Derogue, the shackles instantly heated up when they got close to the Chosen, hindering Ray from putting them onto him. Although it doesn't seem like his god cares a lot about him, he still has his divine protection. Leave him be, Solfium explained as the pool of ink started fading out of existence. The god was dispersing the corporeal form to save power. Derogue was still caught in Solfium's power, so Ray decided to quickly look for Lydia and the others. When he found them, Lydia was also caught up in a 2-on-1 battle. Well, not really. Her first opponent, the cultivator woman, was stuck in a pile of rubble. There was no telling whether she was still alive. Now, she was facing off against someone with a beard that made them look like a monkey and they were using a golden spear. However, it was clear that the wolf had the upper hand with its combination of bat and bow. Ray silently joined, throwing a slew of curses that hampered the opponent, turning the fight even more one-sided. Wisely, the monkey tried to run, but he was so bogged down that he could only take a beating until he was in the same situation as the first woman. Let's get the noobs and run off, Lydia exclaimed. The two quickly followed the group of refugees that had Hubert. Although they were surrounded, the two came in time to lay waste to another crowd of goons. We have to get out of this city, Hubert exclaimed. I have a way for us to get away, as long as we get past the barriers and locks of this place. Chapter 987 Salamander Skin. Mine is Mar. Carefully, Seth started cutting the pieces from the warm fabric Nadal had finished just the other day, in the evening. It had really only taken him a day to weave the bale of cloth from the salamander thread. The blacksmith followed the template he had created using blueprint. For the design, he had actually taken inspiration from the suits Nico had designed for the Oath Guard and some of the members of the field teams to wear below the armor. Of course, this would never reach the ears of the tailor. It mustn't. As one of the prime opponents of the stupid superhero suits, Booz could never know that Seth was working on a one piece to wear under his armor himself. Even when it was just a piece of secondary equipment. After all, the new pieces made from sky silk had pristine effects, that this robe was probably unable to beat. Instead, he would switch between the set of pants and shirt and the suit he was making, depending on the situation. Previously, the truly useful effects of the sky silk, which consisted of massive overall strengthening, were dependent on the open sky and what kind of weather conditions were given. They were nice to have, but hard to count on. It was only after Nico managed to make the effects semi-permanent by mixing it with a thread that charged and supplied solar power, that they became an indispensable asset. They were perfect in cases where Seth decided to physically fight. This suit on the other hand was meant to further augment his literal fire power. Kin of Fire and the Trignus gloves already gave him an unbeatable conversion rate of costs and effects. The only metrics that were still restricting him were his resource pool and computational abilities. As for his resource pools, while the fire magic depended on mana, his pyromancy was an ability and depended on mental power. Mental power depended on willpower, which was already his strongest attribute. However, he actually had a much better cheat to enhance his mana. This left computational ability. Whether it was bending fire on a huge scale, or massive spells, and especially both of them at the same time, posed a huge strain on Seth's concentration. There was no problem if all he intended to do was let loose and generate an all-encompassing sea of fire that would indiscriminately destroy anything in its way. But that was not always the best way, especially since Seth was actually worried about casualties. Just controlling fire on a massive scale was already hard, differentiating between friend and foe became next to impossible if he went all out. However, improving both of those was just the further development of his initial goal, which was to further improve his resource regeneration by relying on fire absorption X in cooperation with the salamander flame. Once he cut out the template pieces from the fresh fabric, he put the remaining pieces aside, for the other tailors to work with. Seth didn't have a sewing machine. For the sewing skill to take full effect, one had to sew by hand. Using the fire thread and a needle made from Olympian silver, he started moving in a practiced pattern. He had spent the last month learning all kinds of stitching techniques from Nadal until he was able to confidently apply them to actual items. One may think that the pattern of the stitches was not important, but the correct stitches with the right threads could vastly improve the durability of a cloth item. Tailors couldn't engrave or etch their works to imbue magical properties, so they had to mostly rely on either using special thread or perfect craftsmanship. Of course, there was also embroidery, but this was actually a skill that often necessitated a special class. An embroiderer could create an effect similar to a blacksmith's engravings, by embroidering specific patterns with conductive thread. But there currently were no embroiderers in Minas Mar, and Seth also didn't really have the aspiration to learn yet another specific enchantment skill. All he could do was concentrate and do his best, applying his learned skills. Radiant Forgerite's absolute focus and craftsman's precision really came in handy, even if he wasn't forging. The needle quickly dove in and out of the cloth, connecting the pieces and slowly combining them into two pieces of clothing. A flaming golden two-piece bodysuit, one for the pants, one for the upper body. He only realized how much time had gone by when he put down the finished pieces. Still, his eyes shone. So far the effects of the clothing aligned with what he was aiming for. After hesitating for a moment, Seth decided to immediately continue. Since the body was prepared, he now needed to add the soul. As mentioned, the souls he had chosen for this were the souls of the two generals of Bragmomal, Seth had harvested a while ago. One was a typical fire demon mage specialized in fire, the other was a warrior versed in fire and hand-to-hand combat. The latter was an avid customer of a skin etcher. A skin etcher was like a demonic tattoo artist, that etched demonic runes into a demon's skin to imbue them with demonic powers, not unlike Seth etching them on weapons. Etched directly into the skin, the runes could turn into strong but dangerous innate skills for demons. This guy was so covered in them, that the various demonic stains and seeped deep into his soul, making it just as good as the fire demon's soul for Seth's purposes. While Nadal made the fabric, Seth had put the two souls through the refinery, so they were mostly massive blank souls with only their affinities and skills concerning fire left. When it came to forging the souls, the blacksmith once again showed great care to replicate the cloth. It had worked with the garment of death and some subsequent tries, so he made it a standard procedure. As for the enchantments, this was the place where he wanted to make up for the computational lack. It was late evening when he sat down to enchant both souls with the generic automaton core circuit he learned from Cormac Pale. This way the shirt and pants would be able to act independently like the golden fleece, saving him the strain to concentrate on using them. Essentially, it was like getting another 2 CPUs that could operate fire. While Seth could concentrate on controlling the fire, one of these would be able to make sure that he didn't harm anyone he didn't intend to hit. On the other hand, the mage soul would be able to improve the number of multicasts he was able to do at once. Midnight. The soul armaments were finished and engraved. Seth stretched his body and walked for a moment after sitting for hours. "Are you okay?" Sivri asked, a little worried. "Sure, just a little sore from sitting so long," Seth answered with a smile. "At least it was worth it. The shirts look good. I didn't expect you to make such a leap in just a month. The buffs of an Orihuma are really great." "Well, we paid for it with our world peace. It would better be." Seth joked sarcastically. In some ways, the apocalypse was a blessing. Although his life was fraught with dangers, it had freed him from his stagnating life. "Well, then. Time to finish this." With that, he sat back down and started infusing the soul armaments. During his grind to raise sewing, he had not neglected to practice the soul infusion into the fabric. Once in a while, he had used a small soul to infuse into a piece of clothing. This way he kept the experience fresh in his mind and gained more confidence. Slowly, the soul armaments sank into the clothing. Ding! You have finished a unique item. X2. Ding! A synergy between the item and your trait, Kin of Fire, has changed your item X2. Ding! A synergy between the item and your trait, Olympian Myths, has changed your item X2. Notification rang out, once he submerged the 2 pieces in the waters of Styx. Surprisingly, a new synergy had snuck among the notifications. Salamander Skin, Shirt, Concept. Unique, Ego. Salamander Skin Set. Durability, 1500. Physical Defense, 450. Mag Defense, 750. 1 item regains durability in fire. 2 item is immune to physical damage. 335% ice resistance. 4 Salamander Fire. 5 Cager's Fire Magic. 6 Passive Skill, Demon Broadcast. Set Effect, Elemental Synergy. A shirt woven from the flame of the fire elemental, Salamander. Created by craftsman Smith, using various peculiar means from a material created in cooperation with Master Booz. Do not wear it, if you can't take the heat. Requirements: Salamander Skin's Acknowledgement, 100% fire resistance. Salamander Skin, Pants, Concept. Unique, Ego. Salamander Skin Set. Durability, 1500. Physical Defense, 450. Mag Defense, 750. 1 item regains durability in fire. 2 item is immune to physical damage. 335% ice resistance. 4 Salamander Fire. 5 Arth is 42 Fire Cantrips. 6 Passive Skill, Demonic Aura. Set Effect, Elemental Synergy. A shirt woven from the flame of the fire elemental, Salamander. Created by craftsman Smith, using various peculiar means from a material created in cooperation with Master Booz. Do not wear it, if you can't take the heat. Requirements: Salamander Skin's Acknowledgement, 100% fire resistance. Chapter 988. Hardwig vanished. Feeling the burning hot fabric on his bare skin was invigorating. He could immediately feel the effects of fire absorption X. The fatigue that had built up over the day was quickly melting away. It was not like he was incredibly tired, but it still felt like he drank a coffee, or an energy drink, as he felt wide awake again. Looking at the aura of fire surrounding him, quickly melting the stone below his feet and threatening the wooden workbenches in the room, Seth decided that testing the power here was a bad idea and unwillingly stopped the salamander skin from operating. Apart from the effect, he also found that the salamander skin actually felt more comfortable to him than the sky silk set. Maybe Kin of Fire was not a one-directional effect and Seth felt better when surrounded by flames, thanks to this trait. Despite looking like a skin-tight combat suit made from a flickering golden yellow fabric, Seth felt as comfy as wearing pajamas. From now on, he would go into battle, wearing pajamas under his armor. It was a funny thought, but the comfort was undeniable. As comfortable and powerful as it was, Seth was glad that it wouldn't be almost invisible once he wore the full Scorpio armor. The camouflage effect of the Hika cloak would make it even harder to be spotted, as long as he wore it. "Are you finally done?" a sultry voice greeted him when he came back to his quarters. "You really made us wait," a cheekier voice added. When he came home, he met his two girlfriends in their very own pajamas. Having finished the salamander skin scratched an itch Seth had for the past 6 weeks, ever since he got the idea of using the fire thread for a new item for himself. It was just a shame that the usability for the thread, in general, was rather lower, unless he went through the whole ordeal of making a full armor set, like he did with the death set. Otherwise, the thread was useless for anyone not immune to fire. Even then, the sky silk items were a better cloth product. "Don't you want to stay in bed a little longer?" the blacksmith asked. It was morning. Having finished the target project, he felt quite relaxed and wanted to spend some leisure time before he started grinding again. "We can't. We already have an appointment with Lixus and Bulko. You should also get ready, you have an appointment with Lena," Mina denied him, while she was languidly putting her clothes on in front of him. "Right, the 4 of us are going to Little Gamma," Finn added. She was not as much of a tease as Mina and was getting dressed in their fairy form. I didn't know about that. Why Little Gamma?" Seth asked a little confused. "Right, you came so late last night, we might have forgotten to tell you. Lena will explain it." Finn proved that she could be as much of a tease as Mina and left the bedroom. Mina just gave him a look and a mischievous smile, before also leaving the bedroom. "Tisk, fine. Then I guess I will get read, too," the blacksmith crumbled and rolled out of bed. While the girls had used lifestyle magic, Seth took his time in the shower. Drying himself by bathing in a column of fire, he equipped some normal clothing and got on the way to meet Lena. "Tower, where is Lena now?" he asked after leaving the bathroom. "Lady Lena is currently residing in her office above the surface." The tower ego answered him quickly. Seth sighed and entered the elevator to the surface. Had the princess been in her room inside the tower, he could have teleported there. Since she wasn't, he had to take the elevator that took quite a while to reach the city above. During the minutes the elevator took, Seth thought about asking the tower whether she currently had any visitors, but he realized that it wouldn't really change what he intended to do. He was going to knock on that door, either way. "Seth, did you forget about me?" someone suddenly approached him as he was on the way to Lena's office. It was some gaudy goat walking on its hind legs. "Nope, I was just busy doing stuff." "Tano, what can I do for you?" Seth halted and asked. "Ah, Arim, nothing. I just thought of talking to you when I saw you," the demon suddenly answered, embarrassed. "Ah, did you miss me?" the bard asked with a grin. "It's nothing like that, okay, a little. I'm having a hard time contacting my associates with WebNovel on my tail. I'm bored," the demon said a little down. It was the first time Seth found the goat actually depressed. At any other time, one could have called Tanomol a bubbly personality. "Do you maybe want to get out of here once in a while?" Seth asked slowly. The demon's hopeful eyes were answer enough. A way to give the demon some relief from monotony without revealing his whereabouts. He had just the right idea. "How about moving to one of the tree stations and helping to raid dungeons together with members of the Oath Guard?" he asked carefully. He didn't want the demon to catch on to his scheme. "You just want me to go outside and collect souls for you." He failed to hide his scheme miserably. "However, it would remind me of the time when I started my business 15 centuries ago. It might bring back some thrill and nostalgia." "Okay, I'm in." Somehow his scheme succeeded anyway. "Great decision. I was already on my way to Lena, I will bring it up with her. I'm sure we can find a place for you at one of the smaller tree stations where you can help with the raids," Seth assured him happily. "Then I don't want to delay you any longer." Tano said and left, happily smiling. It was hard to tell whether that was a smile, but it was definitely a positive expression. With the demon out of his way, Seth had no excuse to procrastinate any longer. Following his initial plan, he knocked loudly and confidently on Lena's office door. "Come in, Seth," it came from inside. "How did you know it was me?" the tower master asked, surprised, sticking his head into the office. I'm not waiting for anyone else today, she answered offhandedly. I see, he said and entered the room, sitting down at the opposite side of her desk. Finn and Mina told me this morning that you had business with me. Lena sighed and nodded slowly. Next, she stood up, locked the doors, and even closed the window shutters. When she sat down again, the office was surrounded by a soundproof barrier. Hardwig vanished, she finally revealed with a heavy voice. What? Seth asked confused. He needed a second to remember who it was. Hardwig was Lena's brother and one of the candidates for the throne of Krina and their best informant and ally in the Empire's capital. I just got an answer from Idalan Mo. Things in the capital aren't looking good. My brother disappeared and the few people I could call my friends were under heavy surveillance. The other princes are scheming something, and they are targeting us, me. I see. What could they be planning? Seth mumbled seriously. He understood why she had taken all preparations to keep this a secret between the two, for now. It seems to have something to do with the new ambassador that will be sent. Since Hardwig is out of the picture, they used the chance to push for a change in representatives. One thing is for sure, the new guy is no good news, she said depressed. Are you worried about your brother? Do you think they actually managed to? No. No, I doubt they could have gotten rid of him. My guess would be that he went into hiding until he is certain of his victory. Lena interrupted his question. For now, we should worry about ourselves. I originally asked for a meeting, to give you an update on the progress for the Pythian Games. Oh, can we already announce a date? Is that why Mina and the others went to Little Sigma? Seth asked, surprised over the sudden turn to a happier topic. Yet. We are ready so far. We can decide on a date and start firing up the promotional campaigns, now. That's what I originally wanted to talk to you about before getting the message from Mo, she answered with a nod and sorted the papers on her desk. Lena was the one in charge of the Pythian Games since she was also the one with the best understanding of the pathworks, its worlds, and the people of Krina. She knew the best how to draw in these people. After Seth arrived in the late morning, they talked until late evening over the rough outlines of rules and regulations pertaining to the games and their tournaments. Chapter 989 The Great Return. THRES-. Governor, you have to come quick. There is an airship aiming for THRES. Versi, one of the former experiments, informed him. Curious what the commotion was about, Adam got up and walked out on the street. He took a deep breath, enjoying the fresh and clean air that had filled THRES after Minas Mar delivered on the promise. Although the tree was not big enough to cover the whole city, it fit snugly under their barrier and protected the part they had and intended to restore. Through the crown of the tree, he really spotted a flying ship. It was a small and sleek design. He had seen similar vehicles in the Moor Empire. These ships were built for speed, not distance, so it was quite curious how such a model had found its way to THRES. Sire, they are going to crash into our barrier. Should we open it? Versi asked hesitatingly. They didn't know who the visitors were, but would they really let them ram and burn into their barrier? However, just in this moment, Adam noticed a slight change in the ship's flight path. That won't be necessary. They are landing, although rather sloppily, the artificial druid calmed his friend. Soon his words were proven true, as the others also noticed the ship getting slower as it got closer and making a slight dip to the ground. A graceful swerve more and the ship crashed into the ground in front of the barrier without even a semblance of lowering their speed. It was a respectable crash landing that created quite the crate in the ruined cityscape outside. It was hard to believe there were any survivors, however. Fuck. Hubert. You should have checked the fuel beforehand, a female voice cursed as the bent door was kicked out of its frame. A familiar woman stepped out, while the destroyed door was still flying through the ruins. I don't know whether you noticed, but we weren't really in a situation where I could have leisurely made a maintenance check before starting, a man defended himself as he was brought outside. The old-looking man was covered in scars and carried in the arm of a burly dude. Now, let's all calm down. Although this was frightening, it's not like any of us was hurt, a third person, wearing ragged robes followed them outside. The woman clicked with her tongue before she turned to Adam and the others standing on the city wall. Hey Adam, I'm back. I brought some settlers if you want them, she said and pointed at the ship, where more and more people exited, roughly 20. Lydia. That was quite the entrance, Adam exclaimed with a laugh. Right, thanks to someone choosing the wrong escape vehicle, she said with a side glance at the man being carried. We were in a hurry. I'm sorry, okay. You are lucky we just barely made it all the way to THRES. Hello, you must be Adam? I'm Ray, a member of Myanmar like Lydia. The man over there is called Hubert. Nice to meet you, Ray used the chance while they were bickering, to introduce himself and Hubert. Likewise. I reckon you guys fled from something or someone. Adam finally asked after watching the spectacle for a moment. Stuff happened, Lydia answered that question with a sigh. How about you all come in first and we talk in detail about what happened and what to do with these people, he said, nodding at the group Lydia introduced as potential immigrants. Myanmar. While Lena started refining their requirements for the tournament with their people and Python, Seth was free to return to his workshop. Or rather, he entered the alchemy labs. Since leveling up past craftsman was a chore, he wanted to bring his basic skills there first before he started the hard path on either of them. It was a little lonely, knowing that Finn and Mina would be there when he would return to his quarters since they were in Little Gamma helping with the organization of the Pythian Games. Seth understood that Lena wanted people she trusted there, to help organize especially the security. Despite the bad news from Krina, the princess was still doing her best and Seth decided to do the same. This was how he threw himself into the study of alchemy. I told you to simply follow the recipes I prepared. Allison scolded him again. After throwing himself into the study of alchemy he ran into a thick wall. Things were going well and he understood the recipes Allison prepared, so he thought he might also be able to come up with his own recipes. He quickly suffered defeat. It became quite obvious that he lacked talent in potion crafting and it was best to just follow working recipes, which was hard enough with recipes fit for a journeyman when he was still an adept. Sorry, I will stop it from now on. He answered embarrassed after his experiment filled the laboratory with dark, smelly smoke once again. Until my level is higher, he added in his mind. Although his will to level up his alchemy was originally with the thought of creating legendary materials or potions later on, Seth found another goal he could reach with the skill. Improving his spirit smithy. What he thought of was adding an alchemy station and an acid shelf for demonic rune etching. Over the past weeks, especially after getting closer to Sivri, Seth had most confirmed his suspicions, even without making Sivri direct say it. Sivri, Cerberus, the Golem Forge, and the Soul Refinery were quite different from the other perks of his skill. They could not only work autonomously but also match his own skill level. At this point, Seth felt quite confident in his guess, that Forgebrand had split off parts of his very own soul to inhabit these crafting stations and Cerberus. However, the only way he could have really ascertained this was dying. He still remembered that he met his predecessor in the brief time after his first and only death in a dungeon. Since then he only became more careful, missing the chance to meet Forgebrand again. As for Sivri, he was pretty sure she was someone close to the Dwarven Master at the time, though he didn't have any clear guess as to what exactly their relationship was and what Forgebrand had done, though the blacksmiths already had his doubt before the first time Sivri refused to talk about Forgebrand. There was a clear shift in Forgebrand's behavior. This was something Seth knew from his visit to Krina's treasury where he met Ceres and another ego item, that were able to tell him a little about the dwarf. Adding everything together, Seth guessed that it had to do with the splitting of parts of his own soul. But maybe he had gone even further and patched up these holes with foreign souls. His skin crawled when he thought of that possibility. It wasn't that he didn't think about fusing souls into his own to become stronger, but he was far from desperate enough to do something so obviously stupid. What could have been Forgebrand's reason? Of course, as an avid reader, Seth smelled the drama and he was convinced it had something to do with Sivri. But it was actually none of his business, so he didn't interrogate her on it. The important point was, that he didn't need to use parts of his own soul, to make autonomous crafting stations. Sivri was the proof of that. Matching his skill level seemed like a natural restriction of the spirit smithy itself. All he needed was the skill level and the fitting soul for the crafting station. Seth already had a soul in mind. His goals set, he focused on following Allison's recipes, although he failed almost 50% despite his high specs. A twitch, a drop too much and the potion turned a disturbing purple color. He had failed, but it wasn't his fault this time. His communication orb had vibrated in the crucial moment. Mary? Why do you call? Seth asked with a wistful look at the failed potion. We finally got a message from Lydia and Ray. They arrived in THRES and they found McCarthy. Where in the world did they find McCarthy? I'm sure they would want to tell you themselves. Come to the embassy, we are doing a group call in the meeting room. Chapter 990 storm ore. Flickering lamps submerged the rough mine walls in their unsteady line. The surviving mining personnel were huddling together, trying to share some warmth. Although the mines had proven their relative safety, they were cold and desolate. Mike was staring at the communication orb as he supplied it with magic power. It stayed unresponsive, just like the little bar on the phone he got in Delta. There was no way to report back what he had just heard. Cyber worms, what a terrifying thought despite the stupid-sounding name. Mechanical parasites that invade the bodies of people and monsters, slowly taking control of their hosts. That was how Kruger, the man who finally decided to let him in, described them. They would attach to the spine of their host and take control. At first, it would try to copy the host's behavior, but only to get closer to others and help other worms to affect them. When there were no more victims around, they would start consuming minerals. The mortifying part was, that the host body would start to slowly turn into a mix of meat and metal. These hosts could only be detected by a special metal detecting device. Kruger said it was originally used for mining purposes, to differentiate metallic ore from stone. We would have already called for help or warned others if communications worked out here. There is no phone signal so far out here, not that it would get through the constant storms. If you are really a lord from Minas Mar, you should be strong enough to help us get out of here. I don't know why you came here, but you should drop it here and return with us, Kruger talked to him insistently. Mike looked at him for a moment, giving it a serious thought. No. I'm on a divine quest. I can't return before I find storm ore. It's too dangerous to take you along. Mike revealed his goal, hoping the man would be more understanding. Mike couldn't just drop his objective and walk back all the way he came from, just to escort a bunch of strangers to safety. I can let you come along when I'm on my way back, he added and fell silent again, staring at the comm orb in frustration. Not just because he couldn't contact Minas Mar, but also because of the guilt he felt, denying Kruger's request. He could only soothe himself with the fact that he wouldn't take too long, since he acquired a car. Kruger's face froze for a moment when he heard Mike's goal, but then it suddenly turned into a smile. An expression that absolutely didn't fit his face and made the beastman feel uncomfortable. Then all our problems are solved. Kruger exclaimed in joy. I took the last batch of storm ore when I fled from that wretched mine, he said and brought out a clean metal box as if to prove that he had it. You have storm ore here? How? Mike asked, confused by the man's sudden action and claims. Well, he stopped his cheering hesitantly. You see, I wasn't originally stationed in this place. I was the guard overseer at the mine directly beside the perpetual storm. Mike looked at him, his gaze clearly asking why he was here then. You see, things went to shit there first when these things started appearing, kidnapping people. So, I grabbed the last batch of high-quality ore and got out of there. Not my proudest achievement. Even less so considering the car ran out of energy halfway down the road. In the end, I was stranded here, while things only kept getting worse. Then the car outside was mine, but you can have it, and the ore. Just take me, I mean us, along, he begged Mike and opened the box, showing him a bunch of glistening rocks. It was clear that this man valued his life, making his story about cowardly running away with a sack full of booty more believable. Reluctantly, Mike took the box the man was offering, to make sure it really was the ore he was looking for. Although the chosen of Mahis had no appraisal skill for materials, the system rang the moment he held the box. Ding! You have obtained high-grade storm ore, 5 kilograms. Your quest has been updated. Quest, Holy Armaments of Mahis. Difficulty, Special. Travel into the unclaimed mountains, toward the perpetual storm at the border between the mountains and the desert. There you will find storm ore fit to be used for Mahis holy armaments. Requirements. 1. You have to travel alone. Currently, true. 2. Obtain at least 50 kilograms of medium-grade storm ore. Currently, 10/50. 3. Find or become a blacksmith master. Currently, false. Rewards. Blessing of Mahis on the ore. Blueprints of Mahis holy armaments. Do you have more ore? Mike asked after seeing the quest log. It seemed that the conversion between high-grade and medium-grade ore was 1:2. As long as he got 4 more boxes like this, he would be able to fulfill all quest requirements. The fact the ore he got counted to his quest showed that the quest did not require for him to reach the storm, or the mine at its foot himself. However, Kruger's expression fell when Mike asked for more. He seemed a little nervous. I do have some more. Here, is that enough? He asked nervously as he brought out 3 more boxes, looking at Mike almost desperately. When Mike took them one by one, the completion rate of the quest rose, reaching 41/50. It was just barely not enough. Tisk, almost, Mike muttered under his breath. Almost? What do you mean almost? I already gave you everything I had. Do you know how much that is worth? Aren't you getting a little greedy? Just how much more do you need? Kruger asked agitatedly. Mike didn't blame him and tried to explain. I didn't make the quest requirements. I still need 9 kilos of at least medium-grade ore to meet the quest goal, Mike answered calmly. Although he felt bad for the man, he couldn't just turn around without finishing his quest requirements. Of course, he was ready to give the boxes back to the man. Kruger's face darkened as he mulled over the problem. He knew that the others at the side were listening to this conversation. Despite his cowardly nature, it seemed like he was truly concerned about them and was trying his best to get them out. Suddenly, his face lightened up. The car. The car. There should still be some bags of ore in the car. They were already inside when I took it. I don't know what quality they are, but maybe that will be enough, he quickly shared his idea. Mike nodded slowly. If he was able to fill the rest of the requirements with the ore on the ATV, then all conflicts would be solved. It wasn't like he wanted to leave these people behind, but that they couldn't because of the quest. If he had finished the quest, there was nothing stopping him from helping these people return and then get home himself. Let's go look then. The quicker we get out of here, the better. Kruger said and briskly walked to the blast door to the mine. Mike followed him at some distance. The man had seemed quite careful before, but with salvation in sight, he seemed almost hasty. By the time he caught up to Kruger, the older man had already passed the inner gate, waiting for him at the outer one. Press that button and close the inner one, while I open the entrance, he asked Mike. Despite being in a hurry, he still remembered the safety measures and treated the 2 gates like an airlock. The beastman followed his request and soon the inner door was closed, and they were able to step outside into the snowstorm. Nothing had changed. The snowstorm was still raging, the barrier still flickering. The settlement lay silently before them. Still, Mike had become infinitesimally more careful after hearing the story of the cyber worms. They walked over to the ATV. Kruger surrounded it and opened the hatch for the storage in the back. Mike had only searched the cockpit when he looked to whether it was still usable, he had not checked the back then. Following Kruger, he found that the back of the ATV was half filled with simple jute sacks. Unlike the high-grade ore, the more normal ores were treated with less care it seemed. Unceremoniously, Mike started throwing them in his inventory. 42. 43. 44. 45. The number on the quest log continued rising, while he got notifications that he obtained storm ore. However, over 90% of the contents here were low-grade ore which didn't count, so the number of the quests only rose slowly. It also explained why someone just left it in the ATV Kruger could simply steal. This was the stuff that was almost not worth refining, but too precious to throw away. 48. 49. 52. Still, by the time he had put more than 3/4 of the sacks into his inventory. At this point, he had ore equivalent to 52 kilograms of medium-grade ore and 170 kilograms of low-grade ore. Ding! You have fulfilled 2 requirements of Holy Armaments of Mahis. Please find or become a blacksmith master now. The notification rang in his head. He smiled wryly when the system told him to simply become a blacksmith master. He had seen the struggle Seth went through to become one, so it sounded almost like a joke. Now he just needed to return to Mina's march. Mike, careful! Kruger suddenly exclaimed behind him, when Mike was distracted, checking his quest status. The man's sword swiped through the air and the Catman was able to hear a thud in the snow. He whirled around, just in time to see another thing wriggle on the ground. White hilt flew from the sheath and Mike severed the creature as it shot itself at him with incredible speed. Only then, in the light of the flaming sword, was he able to see what he had cut. Still wriggling on the ground was something like a snake. Its body was made from segmented metal parts that glinted in the flame's light. The head, if one could call it that, had 3 blade-like prongs or mandibles resembling the inside of a mixer. These prongs were seeping with a clear, slightly yellow fluid. We should hurry. Let's get the people from inside and flee. Kruger nodded and the two men ran inside, closing the doors behind them. What was that? Those things weren't there when I initially came here. My guess is that they lay dormant until there are signs of life. Like, literally everything you did after coming here, he answered with a shrug, and he walked forward to open the inner gate. When they returned to the mine, the survivors had already gathered. It was the first time Mike saw all of them, they were pitifully few. He had seen the living facilities that were probably meant for hundreds of people. Before him stood a measly 10 and they weren't looking well. At least they would easily eat in the back of the ATV. Did you get all your food and stuff? Mike asked again to make sure. They nodded silently. Then let's get out of here.